Bless the cipher, the rotation. God bless the beatboxer's lungs. Amen for breath control. The smiles that pry open faces when flow goes unbroken. And the smoke. To stories you can see, to coming in on the one.
What's going on, good people? My name is Mazi Mutafa, the Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life, and this is the first episode of No New Leaders. And it's a weekly conversation that we're looking to host with some friends of the organization who are here in the DC metro area, but also some folks around the country. That'll include interviews, profiles, and hopefully some spirited conversations. I want to try some new things with this, and ideally this is going to be a weekly broadcast every Sunday beginning around 4:15. And I'm really excited about the folks that are here. But at least the first person shouldn't be a stranger to you if you know Words Beats and Life, because he's kind of the de facto unwritten about co-founder of Words Beats and Life, and that would be Dr. Jason Nichols. What's going on, Jay?
Why am I unwritten about?
Well, I'm saying because I always talk about the founders as being. I'm just saying because normally I talk about there being 4 founders because of the legal documents, and you weren't one of them. So officially, you're not a co-founder, but you've been here since before the organization existed. Today, you are a public intellectual contributing to multiple publications, multiple broadcasts, and it's an honor to still have you in our midst, contributing not just what it is that you think, but what it is you understand, what it is that you know. To be able to enhance the work that we do and enhance the conversations that we have.
Thank you for having me. You know, I'm always here for Words Beats and Life. Words Beats and Life has done a lot for me personally in my development, and any opportunity to give back to the organization that helped shape me, I jump at the opportunity. So thank you, Mazi, for having me, and thank you just for being my brother altogether.
No doubt. And I definitely want to talk about that idea of shaping, because I think that this probably has a lot to do with my own thoughts about leadership. But why don't we talk about the amazing sister and I miss Sister Carrie? What's going on?
What up?
Well, we're trying to check in on this weather because it's crazy outside.
Oh man, it's hot. It's hot all over. It's in the hundreds. I'm out here in the country. I'm visiting family, and it's hot. I'm not even with y'all. That's why I'm over here glowing. I don't sweat. We glow. So there you go.
Well, no doubt. Well, I want to thank you all. The whole idea let's be transparent. So part of the reason why we're doing this show is because Words Beats and Life this is our 20th year of service to the planet. And in that 20 years, we've met some really amazing people. We've done some really interesting things. And we want to showcase some of those folks. But I'll be totally transparent. And coming up with the name of this show is called No New Leaders. And it's lowercase k, capital NOW, new leaders, all lowercase. Because I'm really struggling with this idea of leadership and what it means today and whether or not it's still relevant, or if I'm just a crazy person because I run a nonprofit and that skews the way that I think about leadership. And I wanted to not just have that idea, but to be able to have conversations with friends who I think to varying degrees consider themselves to be leaders. So it's like I'm saying the thing that you consider yourself isn't really a thing, and I want to have a debate with you, not debate, a discussion with you about that. And not even just for giggles, but this idea of are there ideas from our past, or that we as a generation, because most of the people that are going to be guests and co-hosts on this show are kind of hip hop generation folks, whether or not the ideas of leadership we have are from black and white documentaries that we saw, or speeches that we listened to, or books that we read, or if they're really relevant in our lives. Because I think that conversations about leadership and who are the leaders and when are the leaders coming and we are the leaders, all these things are just kind of taken for granted that people understand, believe, agree. And I think that the more that we have conversations with people outside of our bubbles the more we realize that there are lots of things that we take for granted as just being real and concrete and understood that are just not agreed to by some of the people that we engage with, whether that's in political circles or organizing circles or running organizations. And I'll be honest, part of the reason why I came to this conclusion is because I had people tell me I wasn't a leader. And my response was, but I'm not trying to lead anybody. So you're right, I'm not a leader. I'm a manager. I'm an employer. I'm a person that seeks out talent to be able to solve problems. And I don't really think about those things as leadership. I do think about those things as management, as kind of governance. But I think that my own view of leadership really is what I described as black and white documentaries, books that I read, and things that I learned about people from the past, but not necessarily people that I'm following today. I could be alone in that, though. What do you all, just because this is the whole premise of the whole show, is every week we're going to come back and examine this idea of leadership. Who are leaders, managers, da 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 da. So, like, how are you all weighing in on this topic? Carrie, you want to go first?
For sure. I think leadership has changed so much over this past generation, and what we consume and what we assume as leadership has changed, especially when we think about the social media context of it all. So someone who might not have like the people power that they're assumed to have might have the visual power or broader conversation power that might not exist within a grassroots leadership. And then that translates to who gets the funding, how do foundations check for what they're looking for. And so a numbers game based off of algorithms then determines leadership, which is interesting to me because we always have these different things that become gatekeepers to defining leadership. So, I didn't turn out my light. But think about that. You think about maybe it's the intellectually determined leadership. Are we talking about, people throw out names like Gramsci, and I think I lost y'all, or Solomon. Okay. They talk about all these different people, and that might not resonate to somebody who is in the hood and doing things for their community when we talk about leadership and how leadership is built. So I have been on this own to talk about what does that actually mean, and when we define it, and what is the difference between someone who is a leader versus someone who is an organizer, and can those two things exist in one body as well?
Great points. Thank you so much, Carrie. Jason, how are you chiming in?
I don't know what y'all think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Carrie said. I think of leadership very broadly, in the sense that I think, for example, when I think of leadership in my own life, I think about I'm a leader for my family. That's an important role. Like, you don't have to. I think you're a leader if people depend upon you, and if they follow you. And so there are times where we're forced or thrust into leadership when we didn't necessarily volunteer for it. I think you can still be a leader if you're influential, and people are going to follow what it is that you do or what it is that you say. And so I think about that, and I think about, I love the point that Carrie made about the idea of, are you a leader? Can you be a leader and an organizer? I think about the civil rights context, and I think about people that I look up to, like Ella Baker. She's oftentimes not looked at as a civil rights leader because she was doing the organizing and wasn't necessarily the face of it. But I think that leadership is also multifaceted. There's no, Dr. King, there's no, Montgomery Improvement Association, there's no SNCC, there's no SCLC without her taking the leadership role on organizing. So I think that, I think of leadership in a very broad sense. And how we appreciate our leaders can mean different things. And I definitely understand what you mean about the black and white movies and the speeches we heard, from our generation of hip hop. I remember, the beginning of every record, it would have a Dr. King speech or a Malcolm speech, or a Huey P. Newton speech. And we think of that as leadership. But I think, when people depend upon you, like with what you do at WBL, yes, you are a manager, but you're also a leader. And if you don't come with a clear vision, people are going to be very upset because you are somebody who they depend upon to set a vision and lead the organization. And that is part of your responsibility. And I think being a manager and a leader aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
So check it. So it's interesting, right? Because I think that all the things that each of you have said are kind of common understanding, right? About, well, maybe not common, but things that are understandable to people that are listening or thinking about leadership. I think part of the reason why I push back is because for a couple of reasons. One, that what Carrie was saying about kind of the nonprofit industrial complex and people competing for resources is not a new thing. It actually dates back to those black and white movies. Like one of the most, I quote this anytime I talk about leadership, one of the most influential books I ever read was a book by an author named Harold Cruz called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And it was basically a book about the hundreds of civil rights organizations that came into existence and disappeared because funders decided who they were going to fund. And so that it never even occurred to me when I was reading, Malcolm be critical of Martin or whomever be critical of whomever, that part of what they were arguing about was who's going to get the money, where's the money coming from, and what's it used for. So like when Malcolm was critical about the idea that Martin was inserted into the March on Washington by moneyed interests who were interested in cooling down that boiling hot pot of black coffee. It wasn't just about his rhetoric. It was really about whose interests he represented. And so I think that it's kind of weird to me. Like the reason why I'm pushing back on this idea is because there are so many ideas about leadership, like charismatic leadership, servant leadership, thought leadership, influential leadership. And it's like, but when I really think about even the people that we talk about as being great leaders of their time or of this time, part of leadership is people that are following you. Part of leadership is people that, like, as you said, when you articulate a vision, that they become invested in. I know in my case, the people that are invested in my vision are people I cut checks to. They're people who it's their job to be invested in the things that and I don't think that that's leadership. I think that that's management. I think that's employment. And I think it's not to diminish, and that's the thing about saying no new leaders isn't to say no people doing things that make a difference, but it's to say that being aware of what someone's doing to make a difference doesn't mean you're following them. Doesn't mean that whatever their vision that they have articulated is a thing that resonates with you, that you're going to make the time in your life to get up out the bed and go work on, whether that's a march, whether that's a rally, you name it. And I think that there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that we have influencers, that we have spokespeople, that we have all kinds of things that we kind of decide represent leadership. But I'm not convinced that any of the people in the past or the present that we call leaders really had followers. They had people that were inspired by them, but a lot of them had employees. Like a lot of the people we think about from the civil rights movement worked for those organizations. It was their job to do it. And that, again, having it be your job doesn't diminish the impact, but it means you're not just following a leader. And of course, I understand you could go and work someplace else, but like, I think we should be more critical is about the past that some of us are trying to recreate in the present and the expectations that we have of the people that we call leaders.
I would agree with that. I think about that in the sense of when you talk about people who are employed in the movement versus in the movement because this is something that they have to is when we think about how to organize. So if we have something and there's a bunch of meetings in the middle of the day, and they are at the time when the person who is directly impacted would be at their real job, and they cannot afford to make 40,000 or 35,000 a year as an organizer for your movement, you're going to have different people show up. And I've seen that time and time again. And that is also telling for how we create movements. But I also think that you have more than just employees who follow you. You have a base that is created that then leads to a different thought pattern. So the part of the leadership is like being able to take the challenge of moving something and moving a needle forward, because you have managers, you have people who are literally just there to manage a situation, and they are not necessarily invested in it more than are their 401k plan. But when you are creating an organization and you are spearheading something, then you have a deeper commitment that is to making a vision actualize, right? Now, the next step of that leadership I often wonder about is, when do leaders take that hat off? What does it mean when people, like the book around the founder syndrome? So when we have something and we're growing it and it gets to a certain point, what is that transition where a leader can say, I feel confident in this and I feel confident I can let it go? And that oftentimes is where I see talk about that management versus leadership, where that oftentimes hits a curveball because people are scared to let go sometimes. And that is the biggest sign of leadership to me, is when people can say, I have led this piece to a point where I feel comfortable in letting it go and moving on to the next piece that I need to move. But a lot of times people get scared, and I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, I know there's many different reasons, but I often see that, and I often wonder how do you get that fear, that if you drop it, that it's all going to fall apart.
Well, so instead of just jumping to Jason, so I think that part of the answer to that, at least in the Black community, is that many of the people that led organizations, when they stopped leading them, they were murdered. That's how that was their leadership transition. It was literally from being alive to being dead, and then someone needed to take over. I also think that, like, to be honest, I really think that the idea of leadership in the Black community in America is really different than other groups. And part of that is because Black leadership comes out of religious traditions that are inspired by folks like Moses. Like, what I just heard you describing was like the Moses syndrome, where he's not going to enter the promised land. He's going to take people closer, but then he can't go. It's reminiscent of Dr. King's final speech for the sanitation worker protest. But I don't really think, like, when I think of like other communities in the United States and their leaders, they are usually, for me as an outsider to those communities, they're usually elected. They're elected, and those elected leaders are not leaders. They're representatives. They're supposed to be there to represent the interests of. So this is what I'm saying. Like, there are people we call leaders that are not really supposed to be. They're supposed to represent our interests. And to push back, Karen, the things that Words, Beats, and Life creates, we create things that people have asked for. People want to organize around. We didn't say, you know what really would make hip hops really dope is if we started hosting festivals and b-boy jams and paint. Like, no, the artists themselves, they said they wanted it. We just became a way to get the resources to do what they already wanted. They're not following us. We're following them. Go ahead, Jay. I'm sorry.
No, I would say that's what servant leadership is about. Like, I think you're a bad leader if you are somebody who doesn't listen to the needs and wants and desires of the community that you're leading. If you're just somebody who's like, here's what they need, like, eventually you will get pushed back, and you won't be the leader anymore. You won't be a leader within that community. I think that is part of it, is listening to the people, listening to the community, and then filling that void and continuing to listen I think is a big part of leadership. And I would just say, as far as the paycheck point, at least the people that I've known in like the nonprofit space, I don't know many. You're probably the main guy that I know, but the people that I've known in that kind of nonprofit space, one of the things about them is that they're actually pretty passionate about what they're doing. And if they felt, a lot of times, if it's Words Beats in Life, they're passionate about youth, they're passionate about teaching, and they're passionate about art. And if they felt that anything you were doing in setting the direction for the organization was destructive to those means or to those audiences, there would be an upheaval, and I think that's because you were the leader, you are the leader. And again, leader doesn't mean you're all powerful, you're all knowing, or anything of that sort. It just means that you're accountable. And when you're accountable to other people and you're accountable to communities, a lot of times the best way of being a leader is to actually listen to what it is that they want and need.
I gotta say, I think that part of the aversion to what I'm saying is people hate managers. People love leaders, but I'm saying, like, in terms of like when you think about like, oh, that's my manager, versus like that's my leader. Like when you think about leaders, you think about people who you have fond feelings for. But when you think about managers, you think about that jerk that's asking why you're 5 minutes late and why they're going to dock your pay. And so part of it is like the language versus the actual function. Because I agree with you that oftentimes people that are in leadership should listen to the things that people say they want. But for example, right, when I interview interns for our marketing positions, 100% of them are all college students. 100% of them say, when creating social media, make it so people don't have to read. Make it so people whatever you're creating, make it so they don't have to read. Knowing that the overwhelming majority of valuable information is written someplace. You actually have to read to learn new things, right? So thinking about the way that we do education for young people, a lot of people create programs that are just fun. But what are kids actually learning? How are they being developed? Because I know for all three of us, you two with advanced degrees, reading has been a big part of your development, a big part of informing your opinions. And so when we say that we're going to be responsive to what it is that people say that they want, even if we know it's not what they need, aren't we actually doing them a disservice? Like, shouldn't part of being a leader, even a good manager, be sometimes you know that what people say they want is actually not what is best for them, or that you're not willing to do? Like, of course, you can make reading fun. I'm not saying reading is always going to be. Go ahead, Jay. Jump in.
Yeah, no. So I want to jump in on that because actually, before we all started, I have another podcast where we talk politics, and one of the people that I was literally writing an email to reach out to, some of you may know a guy named Tariq Nasheed, right? And I was reaching out to him to see if I could interview him. And one of the things that I have to give him credit for and what he does is he met people where they were. Because I remember I was critical of Hidden Colors when he first came out with it. But I thought, there's some historical inaccuracies. I was like, look, come to an African American studies class. And somebody, one of my OGs kind of checked me and was like, you are looking at it from your class and education perspective. You need to understand that a lot of people that create things like Hidden Colors are meeting people where they are, and they're a gateway to consciousness. And so I think, that advice that you were getting about people don't want to read if they want to, get information. Sometimes, there has to be some kind of, particularly with youth, I think there needs to be some give there, because you have to meet these young people where they are. You can't meet them with a bunch of text that they're not going to read, or you won't get off the ground or get their attention. Then eventually you can start to do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was going to agree with that, but also thinking about it from the lens of like, there is a spectrum. So no, people do not want to read 8-point font that you try to put all into one Instagram meme that nobody can read, or they don't want a bunch of text all over a TikTok because the TikTok moves too fast. But there are places where it's like, how much, what is the font? How do we make this look viable? And what scares me oftentimes with these gateways to consciousness is sometimes it's completely false information and takes people down the absolute wrong road. And there lies the rub, right? Because, well, and it's Rick Nasheed, no shade to him, Hidden Colors. I know a lot of people who loved it, liked it, bought the bootleg, all that good jazz. But then there's also, when you think about it, there are people who take those little small sound bites and they create literal cults. So we are talking about social media cults, Instagram cults, because people are not getting the full spectrum of information and they get caught into emotion of it all. So when we think about leadership, I think what you were talking about, like the actual aesthetic of leadership, is the emotional aspect. When people think about Dr. King, they think about him giving this speech that makes people want to cry and all of these different things. Yes, that's right. All that. And people think about the emotional connection to these leaders, but they don't think about the actual long term, all the other pieces that had to happen. Even a leadership being able to lead managers is important, because within every leader that I know, whether it's Van Jones, if you want to think of him as a leader, or you think about people who are running for governor, you think about Barack Obama, you even think about Lupita Nyong'o as a stylist, like as a style leader, as a style influencer. There are 15 people behind, at the very minimum, at all times, helping them to be an image. So when you become a leader, oftentimes I think about it in the sense of like, you are deciding that you want to give up yourself. You can look at how quickly they threw Will Smith under the bus as soon as he had an emotional break where he was himself in that moment. A leader has to decide that they can no longer be themselves, and they have to be okay with that, because now your identity is worth more than what your authentic self can afford to lose.
Can I push back? Because I love the fact that there's agreement and disagreement. So I really do think that we should. Well, I want to push back, but I also I want to ask you all a question, which is, and you can think about this one. Who are the leaders that you're following? Who are the leaders that you are following today? Living people, not examples from the past. Living people who you are a follower of today. So that's a question. But I want to push back, because I think what you just described, this idea of kind of dying to yourself. Maybe what you mean, and you can say, nope, that's not what I mean. But maybe what you mean is dying to your own, like your own selfishness or your own personal. I'm not sure what you mean by dying to yourself. So you can explain that maybe. But I feel like this is part of the reason why the rappers that we call conscious are like, I'm not conscious. Don't call me that. Because they also want to be the person that's hollering at the girl at the bar. They also want to be the person that's drinking and smoking and da-da-da-da. They want to do all the things, including carrying the guns and shooting up whatever, not necessarily people, or target practice places. They want to do all those things that the other rappers are doing. And so they're like, yo, don't separate me from my peers. And it is because we have this idea that leaders are somehow above us instead of actually from us. And I think that that's part of the reason why, like, we have, like, it's why most of us, myself included, the people that we consider our leaders are not alive anymore, that they're frozen in time. I actually never met them. I read what they thought in books. I saw them in documentaries, and they influence the way that I think about my own life. But I remember the day I was sitting in the office and said to myself, how come we don't know if Kool Herc has kids? was married?
Mm.
How come we don't know if Bambaataa and like all these things that are like part of being a human being that we don't know about the people that are leaders within our culture and community because they're not whole human beings. They are whatever it is that we need them to be. And I think that that's not leadership. It's like on some levels, it's a kind of idol worship, like this idea of what they are versus what they actually are. P.S. For the people that are watching, because we actually do have people tuned in, feel free to drop comments. You can be like, Mozzie, shut up, you're stupid. Let the people with the advanced degrees talk. Whatever it is you got to say. But Carrie, I wonder, so what did you mean by dying to yourself? And then for both of you, like, who are leaders that you follow today?
Yeah, so I don't mean like dying to yourself. I don't know if I said it quite like that. Maybe I did. Y'all forgive me. But I mean it in the sense of what you're now a brand. So oftentimes, and this goes into the whole idea of influencers. So when I was thinking about who do I follow, who do I think of as leaders per se, and I don't necessarily, there are people in my world who I see as thought leaders, especially within the environmental justice sector. And I've had the opportunity to know them from a more personal level, so I can see them for their full selves. And I can say, yes, this is a full person. And this is someone who I think has been able to move the needle forward in this sector for these different reasons. And that also, but when you're thinking about a broad sense of something, like if you're thinking about a Michael Jackson or even like a Tabitha Brown, like I was like, yeah, I really enjoy watching Tabitha Brown. I will buy all her clothes from Target. I will send everybody in my family this video about her making carrot bacon. But God forbid we see her, like you said, at a restaurant eating a pork chop, then it's going to be a whole different story because her whole brand has become a vegan lifestyle influencer. So in that sense, she has led a lot of people to a different diet. Maybe she's led a lot of people to a different, thought process. But can she be her self in that space? She also has all of these different brand items. Now you have a line at Target. Now you have 2 restaurants. Now you have a spice with McCormick's. So all of these become things that other people are getting paid to be a part of, like you mentioned before. Like, is that, somebody is helping to cultivate your identity now. So your identity is now someone else's paycheck as well.
Well, so first of all, I think it's important for us to recognize that not all leaders are good, like, or even good people or even have good motives or anything. Like, I would say, Donald Trump is a leader. I'd say Vladimir Putin's a leader. Like, you don't always, leaders aren't always good. They don't always have good intentions. They don't always have good intentions for their followers. So I look at leadership and being a leader. I think being a leader is a little separate from leadership, but even still, as kind of a neutral term. And so I do understand your point earlier, Mozzie, when you were talking about people don't like managers. People cannot like leaders either. I also think that it is, I thought your comparison with the rappers that were called conscious and how they rejected that label was spot on, in the sense that with leadership, people expect like this ultimate consistency, because as Carrie said, if I see Tabitha Brown eating bacon, I'm gonna be like, that better be a carrot, or whatever. To me, carrot bacon sounds freaking terrible, but at any rate, I would, we'd all be there with our phones like, look at her eating a piece of real bacon. Whereas, like, instead of just saying, yo, she's living her life, she's, now I do think, and I'm thinking about influencers. I think his name was Derek Jackson, and he was telling people about relationships and telling all these dudes why they're trash, or telling women why the dudes in their lives were trash while he was making videos outside of his mistress's house. Like, there's like a certain level of consistency that we look for, but I think we also have to have this balance where we allow for them to be human. Dr. King had his flaws. Gandhi had his flaws. That doesn't mean that what they contributed to their movements wasn't valuable. And so I think we need to give a little bit of room for leaders to be human. I'm thinking of also of that commercial where it was, when I was a kid, it was Charles Barkley, and he was saying, "I am not a role model. I just get paid to play basketball." And the thing is, I'd be like, "Nah, bro, you are a role model. You are a leader. You've been thrust into that position, and sometimes we don't actually get an opportunity or choice in that matter." But I think at the same time, we need to have room for Charles Barkley to have that bar fight that he has, or to make errors and to grow from them, because leaders are human.
So I feel like this is part of the problem, that each of you keeps conflating different things with leadership. So you just did role model is a leader, and influencer who has company is a leader. And it's like all these different, like if everything is a leader, then nothing is leadership. If everything is leadership, then nothing is leadership.
Yeah, but Mazi, you think that everybody has a company or everybody's an influencer, or like, I think there are lots.
I think everybody's not a leader. That's what I think. I think everyone's not a leader. And everything that so far, like literally. What'd you say?
I'm not saying everyone's a leader. I think there can be micro leadership. Like, I'm the leader of my family, and there are other, but I'm also a follower within my family. I follow my wife sometimes. So I think that they're,
I agree with RBI.
I would say and shouts out to RBI, but I think when we're talking about the idea of influence and leadership, who defines who becomes a leader? And if you're saying that some of these leaders didn't have followers, but you have influencers who have organic followers, literally, you have followers, or even like the kid that lives in Charles Barkley's hometown, and for the full life, they have been able to watch Charles Barkley, and then they watch their own moves. Now, that could be an influencer in the sense of that, because Charles Barkley never gives back to his hometown. Now, the basketball star that also gives back and, participates in some sort of elected official position where they have to be held accountable is different. So I agree with that in the sense of like, who holds Tabitha Brown accountable? Nobody, just the idea of her assumed influence. So does it mean that a leader has to be an elected official? Does a leader have to be, elected to a church? How would you define leadership, Mazi?
Well, so let me answer the question you just asked, because Jason actually answered it earlier when he did this. He's like, "What do you do?" I've never even heard of your carrot bacon before, but I'm gonna get a picture. They're held accountable by their consumers, the people that have trusted them for advice on direction and guidance. Consumers, not followers. And so part of my argument, like, I've been running a hip hop nonprofit for 20 years, right? And I've always thought that one of the beauties of hip hop is that it is a leaderless movement. There is no leader in hip hop that everyone is following, or even a majority of people are following. There are people whose content people consume at a higher rate at different times. There are people who've been pioneers and innovators in the culture who should be recognized and honored for their contributions. But that doesn't mean they're leaders. It means they're examples. It means they are creators. Because I guess part of my thing is that part of this for me really is that many people I know and many people I see on social media who still talk about things like, transforming Black communities, dealing with multi-generational poverty, et cetera, frame it around, the work of a leader or leaders. This whole idea, like this quote that Obama began to quote that said, "We're the leaders we've been waiting for." That this idea that we all have to be on the same page. We all need to agree about the agenda and that seems to me, at least, to require a few leaders whose opinions we all agree enough with to support what comes out of that kind of gathering, right? And I'm saying, like, when I ask both of you, who are the leaders you follow? Carrie gave a couple of examples. Jason kind of ducked the question by saying he's the leader he follows in his own home. But like, I think it's a real question. Like, if movements are led, who are the leaders? And is it the sheer will of people to get involved in the movement, to advance the priorities of the movement, that determine who we say are the leaders? Like I thought that question, because I can't name a person on planet Earth who I would say that's a leader I follow. I could say there are people who other people say are leaders whose work I'm aware of, but it's not a situation where if that person came on television, we sorry to interrupt your program, but such and such is giving a speech and they said X, Y, and Z, and I'm showing up.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing. I would say Tabitha Brown is a leader. First of all, your followers, if you are leading in a capitalistic movement, then your leaders can become your followers become your consumers. That's where you're leading them. You're leading them to buy your products or to follow, in Tabitha Brown's particular case, to follow a particular lifestyle and diet. You know what I mean? That's leadership. So I would say she absolutely is a leader in the vegan space, particularly the Black vegan movement. She's a leader in that movement, and she also has capitalistic goals, and she wants you to buy her products and go to her restaurant. That doesn't make her any less of a leader. It's just like when you went to the Million Man March and I went, they had people throwing dollars up in the air. You know what I mean? Like, they wanted to get your money, and, lead you into a particular lifestyle, maybe into particular practices religiously or wherever it is that their goals were. So I don't necessarily think because someone's a consumer that they're not also a follower. Those things can be mutually exclusive. They don't have to be. So, you buy a Toyota, doesn't mean that you're a follower of Toyota, whoever the CEO of Toyotas is. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that. But when you are following someone like Tabitha Brown, I think Tabitha Brown is a leader. And if you're getting into Black veganism and all that because of Tabitha Brown, she is a leader.
Yeah, I just gotta say, I think that's strange, because then what that means is, like, literally, the overwhelming majority of products that you buy, you're a follower of that company as opposed to a consumer. So here's a question.
No, that's not what it means. Like, that's exactly what I try to draw a distinction between.
No, I got it, because you said if you're following her into the vegan lifestyle, that was the kind of distinction you made around consumption.
She's also an individual. Like General Motors, we're talking about leadership from individuals, correct? We're talking about leaders, not brands. You don't become a follower and General Motors becomes your leader, because General Motors literally just wants you to buy their cars or whatever else. Tabitha Brown wants you to listen to what she says, listen to her advice, and follow her lifestyle, in addition to consuming her products. That's what makes her a leader.
Well, if you just tuned in,
I think it's so.
Let me just let folks know what we're doing, Carrie. If they just tuned in, my name's Mozzie. That guy over there is Jason, and that's Carrie. We're having a conversation in the first episode of No New Leaders, and this episode is really about just kind of setting the stage for how we agree, disagree, see kind of different points in different ways, right? So Carrie, you were about to jump in.
Yeah, I know. I think I lost my train of thought, but that's okay. I definitely think that when we're in this conversation around leadership, this is the conversation that we're having. Is it an influencer? Does an influencer become a leader? Where is the point when an influencer goes from just being someone that gets likes and vibes? Because the girl who's showing off her BBL and, is she a leader if she has 100,000 followers? Not necessarily. But if she goes and uses that platform to move people toward mission, then does she become a leader? Like, what is that spectrum? Where does it go from just being someone who influences someone to someone who actually is a leadership? And then there's that question of like, okay, when we talk about how RBI mentioned that accountability is ingrained. So that means like a teacher has ingrained accountability. Does that make each teacher a leader, or is there a leader of the teachers? A principal, does that mean that each principal is a leader? What would you define those two positions as leader positions?
Me? No, I would say that both of those are managers. One is managing a classroom, one is managing a school. Both are responsible for implementing ideas of people that are not them, and the people that follow them are required to be in their space. Students don't choose to go to school. They might choose the school that they're at, but they don't choose to be there. They're required by law, or their parents are required by law to make sure that they are there. So no, I don't think that they're leaders, again, because I don't think that calling people managers or calling people administrators or all these other things are negative. But here's a different question that I want to pose back. RBI said yes to both. RBI, of the people that are watching, is the one person giving us the most feedback. I think there is inherent leadership in management. All right, so here's a question. I was at a conference last weekend in California, which is why this is our first show. It was actually supposed to be last Sunday. It got delayed because I was at a conference. And I was listening to people talk about this idea of, it was an event for poetry organizations. And I was listening to people talk about this idea of being an ecosystem. And it got me to really thinking about the nature of the work that the people in the room do, and what they were calling on the convener to do. And so I started to ask simple questions that I didn't have answers for. Most of my questions I don't have answers for. But I asked, in this ecosystem, who is the sun? Who is the water? Who is the wind? Because the idea, because the truth is that everyone in that room is the sun in their own home city. They are the brightest light, the giver of life, et cetera, et cetera. But in this national context, who's willing to be the water? Who's willing to be the wind? Who's understanding that leadership is situational, and that the role that you can play has to depend on the challenge you're actually trying to deal with, right? So I'm not arguing that influencers aren't important. I'm not arguing against anything other than the fact that you're calling all these people leaders. That's the only thing I'm pushing back on, is not their value or their impact. It is the idea that people are following them, in the sense that, to be transparent, in the sense that, like, the what I think is one of the most influential ways of thinking about leadership, particularly in the Black community, is in a religious sense, like thinking about a Moses or a Jesus or a Aaron, like thinking about people who got people to leave their home and follow them to a place. Like, those are leaders. They literally took people from a place to another place through discomfort, through complaining, through all. And so, like, understanding that if our concepts of leadership come out of a religious context, and in America, particularly the Judeo-Christian leadership context, I don't know that all these other things that we're calling leadership are leadership in that sense. And that doesn't mean that's the only sense. I'm just saying that I think is the primary influence for the people who we point back to as being leaders of the past, whether that's Marcus Garvey or Malcolm or Fannie Lou Hamer. All of those people had a religious context, a sense of like divine purpose in the work that they were doing. And so I asked this question to this room of organizations: who's willing to be this other thing in this national context? Because my follow-up question was, for those of you that have organizations, is anybody willing to change their mission to be of greater service to the community? Or are we all so fixed in the way that we think about ourselves as the sun that we can't actually incorporate ways to be water? Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Sometimes I say stuff that doesn't make sense. Jason knows.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense. I'm trying to understand the difference between sun and water in this metaphor.
Just that I'm saying, remember, it was about an ecosystem. So this idea that if there is no water, there's no life. If there is no sun, you need all of the things, not just a lot of one of them. You know? So I was saying, who's willing to be a different element in a situation that requires that? You know?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And no one gave you an answer?
To be very honest, a couple of people responded to that, but because I think, number one, because none of them had thought about it before I asked the question. I asked the question to two very specific organizations in the room, and they didn't respond at all. But I think the part of the reason why they didn't respond is because they run organizations that are accountable to boards and have constituents. And if they're going to just be something different, there's some people they got to consult if they're going to do that. Versus, I decided I was going to take the things I asked them and say, Words Beats and Life can do that. Words Beats and Life can be those resources. And let's just do it because we need it.
Yeah, I think that goes back into the question of our nonprofit organizations' leadership. You know, if you also have to manage and manage within the confines of a fiscal calendar and deliverables and board conditions, you really do not always have that ability to be that level of flexible. And sometimes when an outside force comes in and asks you to be flexible, there's a question of, why are you asking me to change if you're not changing? So that's a whole other, that goes into a whole deeper conversation, because if you're asking organization, it would be ideal if organizations could be flexible, but there are all these constraints that have to be managed. And you mentioned about how all the different leaders had some sort of religious calling. When we equate leadership with a higher power that is somehow ordaining us into this space. And maybe that might be one of the only institutions that's not truly forced upon people in America, but in a lot of ways it is, maybe not necessarily through law, but through family constructs, through societal pressures. So where are if not for hip hop, if not for someone who goes in and sees a cipher and says, bet I see this cipher, or bet I see this person who's good on the, good b-ball court, whatever, where do you find voluntary spaces where people want to gather and listen to someone?
So what's in, go ahead, Jay.
No, I'm trying to think this through. So if it's just like or primarily a religious context, the pastor at your church, is he a manager or a leader? He or she, usually he, but.
So it's, what's interesting is that I would argue that they are a leader. And I would argue they're a leader for the reason that Carrie actually just described, which is that people volunteer to go and listen to the guidance of that person, that when the pastor calls, the followers actually do listen. That doesn't mean it necessarily plays out in terms of like when they're talking about sin and stuff like that, but this idea that they're a person whose authority matters to them, not because they're paid to be there. They actually pay the pastor through tithing or whatever, through zakat, etc., contributing to temple. And so and I'm not arguing that I think that the only leaders truly in our society are religious. because I was talking to Jason about this the other day. I think that the military is a space where there really are leaders, that people literally give people directions to go and march over a hill where there's people on the other side with a gun and people do it. This idea that people do what it is that leaders tell, and not in a dictatorship. Like, I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying like they have authority that's been granted through whatever the process is that people believe in it. And I don't think that those influencers or the other people we were naming have authority that the people who consume what it is that they produce just listen to or follow their guidance.
So what's the difference?
I would say almost. No, go ahead, Jason.
So I just want to know what's the difference between a manager at whatever place of employment, whether it's yours or another, and somebody in the military. Because one thing about the military, you always have someone with authority over you until you get to the president of the United States. So with that regard, they're pretty much managers. You know what I mean? At every rank, beyond private, first class or whatever.
So
and
go ahead, Carrie.
No, I would say even the same thing with depending on your denomination. Your pastor, whatever, they could be considered management as well, because there might be a higher level of the church or of the faith that they answer to. And so there's that aspect, but then there's the real right, and they have employees. There's all these different factors that play in. But one of the things that I think is a touching point of all of those is this person helping you to meet your basic needs? So if we just went back down to the base level of, you say you're the leader of your family, which means that your job as the leader of this family is to make sure that the kids are fed, the house is paid for, that everybody is in this house is somewhat stable, and you are helping to meet the basic needs of your family so that your family can thrive and make other plans, and you help to guide that. So an influencer, no, you may not be helping anyone meet their basic needs. A pastor, yes, if you have a congregation and you can lead your fellowship, then there's a lot of things that can grow through helping people meet their basic needs, and that's what brings people into this. Military, unless you're going to draft, a lot of people join the military for basic needs reasons, to protect, their land, to have money, to be able to support their family. So if you're saying a leader helps you to meet your basic needs so that you can thrive, that changes a whole bunch of different conversations. And maybe it's not the leader is actually the one paying the bill, but how is the changes that lead to better quality of life for someone. Or that would be the ideal if we're talking about a good leader versus someone who's,
I think you both bring up great points. I mean, I'm not the definitive no leader expert, but here's what I would say. And this is before I say what I'm going to say, I'm going to ask a question for you to think about, Jason, because the standard you just set is the reason you're a leader in your or that was said. I don't know that you said it, but the reason why you're a leader in your household is because you're able to provide for your family. If you lose your job and you don't have income coming in, are you still the leader? Think about that question, because I just want to know if it is about providing, if it's about monetary.
Well, I don't think it's just about monetarily providing. I think it goes, my wife and I are both leaders within the family. And part of that is because we have our established lanes and we are the decision makers in those lanes. We still consult with one another, but there are certain situations where my wife's like, all right, you're going to make the final decision on this. And there are certain situations where I'm like, all right, you're going to make the final decision on this. Here's my opinion. And I think, that makes us both leaders. When you have a responsibility and you make the final decision. Now, if I lose my job, I don't think it's just about providing, because I will provide for the household in one way or another, which is, if I'm the person that has to be the person God help us. But if I'm the person that has to do all the housework, you know what I mean? We're gonna have a dirty house, but we're gonna, I'm kidding, but that will be my role, and that will be something that, I contribute to the household, and that's what I think servant leadership is about. I still make decisions, it's not like, my wife will be like, you don't make no money, so you don't make no decisions. You know what I mean? Like, she's not gonna do that. And I wouldn't do that to her if she lost, her job or whatever. She would still be, a decision maker in the roles that she feels strong, and I would still be a leader in the roles that I feel strong.
All I know is I'm going to enjoy discussing this topic and others with each of you, because I want you to go back and watch this videotape, because for literally 59 minutes you were the leader of your household, and then when I got specific, it was like, oh, we have a co-leadership. but all I'm saying, bro, is we have this, like, I don't think it's helpful for us to have this moving definition of leadership. That it is, if it is not a thing, if it's all of these things, then to me it's kind of none of them.
But Mozzie, you just brought up the military. So there's a million leaders in the military by your own definition. So how come there can't be two in my household?
Oh, I think there could be. I think there could be, and there are. I just think you didn't acknowledge it until Carrie pressed you. Go ahead, Carrie.
And I think there's a leaderful, and I think that's beautiful, because there's some households where there's not. It's there are some houses where a man, even if he did lose his job, he'd still come in the house and say that he's still the leader. And as the leader, we're eating frankenbeans, even, and you still not going to work. And I'm going to figure this out, and that's an unstable leadership structure. So if Jason is saying we have a dual leadership structure, that is important, because even if he is the person who is now cleaning, there's still a sense of leadership in that we're going to respect that you clean this area, and the areas that you said that you don't want us to step in, we're going to respect that. But there's other households where the person who's doing all the cleaning, they might not respect that. You might not have earned that level of leadership. And I might say, yeah, you sweeped it, but you didn't sweep it well, so we're going to do what we're going to do. So I appreciated thinking about this and this thought, this thought process that we've been able to go to think about what does it take to actually lead. And even sometimes a part of leadership is acknowledging the spaces, like you mentioned earlier, where you're not supposed to lead, where you're able to say, hey, I am the son. I don't know nothing about floating low water. So let me go talk to, Rain Man over here, because he actually knows how the water runs,
No doubt.
Yeah, I think there has to.
I think it's.
Go ahead. Oh, did
I was just gonna say, I think it's I'm having some connection issues. Am I breaking up?
You were for a second.
Go ahead, Jay.
I would say, like, one of the great things about leadership. Number one, I don't think there has to be one leader. Like, if you talk about the civil rights movement, we use the civil rights movement as an example. There were many leaders, even within one organization, and we all recognize that. I think there were people like Ella Baker, like I said, who's a good organizer, and they were like, you are the leader of the organizing realm. Then there are people who were supposed to get people riled up, and they're like, Dr. King, you're good at that. I think that there are, when you have one leader, that's one of the things about military. That's one of the things about, if we look at the structure of a government, is you don't want it to be where you cut the head off a snake and then the whole body dies. You know what I mean? You want to have lots of leaders. And if you do have one person at the top, the thing that makes a leader strong, in part, is to be able to delegate responsibility. And I think that's the management element of leadership.
I hear you. I mean, what I love about this conversation is each of us has gotten an opportunity to share our point of view, and I don't think any of us have convinced the other of the rightness or the wrongness of the other's point of view, but we heard each other and we could engage in a real conversation about it. If there was only one answer, this would be our first and last show. So I look forward to continuing this conversation with both of you and bringing on more people as guests to talk about the ways in which they're managers or leaders or organizers or influencers in their own lives and communities. And people decide for themselves whether or not that's someone they want to follow or someone they want to pay attention to or someone that they want to support. So thank you each for being here, for your brilliance and for your guidance. I truly appreciate it. This is, do each of you want to give out your socials so people can stay in touch with you?
Yeah, I'll give out mine. I am at Dr. Jason Nichols. That's at DrJasonNichols. On Twitter, I think on Instagram as well. And yeah, so you can find me that way. You can find Jason Nichols, PhD, on YouTube or on Facebook. So you can find me there.
Thank you so much.
I'm check the weather on all platforms. Hope to see y'all again and keep going. Let's all continue to be leaderful.
No doubt. Leaderful. That's the word for the day. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Ideally, this is going to be a weekly conversation. Like I said, there's going to be guests beginning on the next show. Thanks especially to DJ RBI for being our most active in the chat viewer and for other folks who tuned in. Hope it was a worthwhile use of your time. My name is Mazi Mutafa, Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life. And those are my co-hosts, Carrie and Jason. There are actually 2 other co-hosts who will be joining us in future shows, in addition to guests. All right? Hope you all are having a wonderful Sunday. Peace.
Ideas, they shake you out of your sleep like when a toddler creeps. Totality of the deep, the mere thought of an unconscious manifestation carried out with the beat. Positive charged protons creating neural explosions. Time hiccups when fingers and pads touch. Dead air smiles because it knows what's coming. The counting is of the clock claps hands. The choreography of the knock slaps jams. And you be like, who made this? Vertebrae responding to the call so bad they make a B-girl curve the wall.